Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Welcome, everyone. Bethany, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you everyone for coming today. We are recording this session and there will be a survey that will be sent out after the end of this session. So I just wanted to welcome everyone. We'll have everyone stay on mute right now. And then if you would like to use the chat, Lynn will actually incorporate questions into the chat with Nolan and Stephen today. So I will hand it over to Lynn.
Thank you so much, Bethany. I'm going to remove that. All right, welcome, everybody. We are the Great Lakes Civility Project. I'm going to do a little intro, and then we will get started with our program. So Nolan Finley began his newspaper career as a copy boy at the Detroit News while a senior in college. After a brief stint with the Jackson Patriot, he returned to the news as a reporter and has since served as the newspaper's city editor, business editor, politics editor, and deputy managing editor. In 2000, Nolan was named editorial page editor, where he directs the expression of the newspaper's editorial position on various national and local issues. His columns have appeared in the newspaper ever since. Nolan graduated from both Schoolcraft College and Wayne State University, and in 2012 was inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. He is co-host of One Detroit on Detroit Public Television. The other half of the Civility Project is Stephen Henderson, who's an American journalist who won the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for Commentary and the 2014 National Association of Black Journalists Journalist of the Year Award while writing for the Detroit Free Press. A native of Detroit, Stephen is a graduate of the University of Detroit Jesuit High School and the University of Michigan. Since 2015, he has been host of Detroit Today and WDET. In 2020, Stephen founded Bridge Detroit, where he serves as executive advisor. He has worked for the Baltimore Sun, the Chicago Tribune, the Lexington Herald Leader, and Knight Ridder. Stephen is co-host of One Detroit with Nolan and host of American Black Journal on Detroit Public Television. Together, Nolan and Stephen created the Great Lakes Civility Project in 2020 with the goal of bringing their experiences and their friendship as evidence that it is possible to cross difficult political divides and even choose to be in close relationships with people who believe differently from you. Since 2020, they've spoken to audiences across America, driven by a goal of empowering people with the tools and the understanding to have difficult conversations civilly and to bring civility into workplaces, relationships, and communities. I'm here as executive director of the Civility Project, and I'll be facilitating today's session. And you can learn more at greatlakescivilityproject.com. I will put that in the chat so you can check us out. And as we're going to jump in, if you have questions as we go along, please keep your microphones muted and throw your questions in the chat, and I will work them into the conversation. So Nolan and Stephen, why don't you kick us off and talk a little bit about where we began with civility?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lynn, and thanks to everybody who's here today. We are always really excited to talk to different groups of people about the Civility Project and the things that we have been working on for many years now, trying to get people to be able to have decent civil conversations with each other and build relationships across political and other divides. Also, gotta say, go blue. Speaking to the Michigan audience, I'm a 1992 graduate of the university, so it's always nice to be with a good Michigan crowd. I'll start just by talking about what the Civility Project is. And I always kind of very simply explain it as an effort by Nolan and by me to share the things that we have learned and experienced over the last 17 years of working together and becoming friends, in an effort to get other people to be able to do the same. If you've ever seen Nolan and I together, if you've ever heard us talk or read what we write, there's just not a lot of commonality here. I mean, very different people, come from very different backgrounds, have really, really different perspectives on just about everything. And yet, we have found a way to not only build a constructive working relationship. We do a lot of work together, but we've also become really close friends, and that's just not common. I mean, it was something that I don't think either one of the two of us would have predicted, and certainly wasn't what people who knew us would predict. I always go back to the very beginning when I met Nolan in about 2007, when I came home to Detroit and Michigan from Washington, and was named the editorial page editor at the Detroit Free Press. And Nolan had already been for almost a decade the editorial page editor at the Detroit News. And anyone who lives in this region knows those are two really different newspapers with really two different outlooks. And so it didn't take long for people to say, well, we've got this Black liberal editor of the editorial page at the Detroit Free Press. We've got this white conservative editorial page editor at the Detroit News. I bet if we put them together on stage or on air, they will fight. And they were right. We did. We did instantly and instinctively. Just about any issue you could bring up, Nolan and I could have an argument about it. I mean, we just don't see things in the same ways. And so people started doing this more frequently, putting us together and watching us argue. But when we weren't arguing and we were together, we started to just kind of talk to each other about, well, what did we like to do, or what were we interested in, or what were our lives like? And the more we did that, the more we realized that there were lots of things that we actually did have in common, other than politics and other than culture and things like that. And that we actually kind of liked each other, that we could find things to talk about and do together that didn't implicate the political divisions that we had. And this was a great surprise to people around us. I mean, I think we can both tell very funny stories about people we know pulling us aside in those early days and saying, are you friends with that guy? Like, how do you put up with Nolan, or how do you put up with Steven? And if you think back to when this is 2007, 2008. This was the middle of a presidential cycle as well. I mean, we're really close to a presidential election, and the outcome of that election was pretty divisive for the country. I mean, lots of people were really excited about Barack Obama being elected as the first African-American president we'd ever had. There were a lot of people who were really angry about that as well. But if you fast forward from that point to 8 years later, to 2016, and think about the outcome of that presidential election, the unbelievable levels of anger that were on both sides after Donald Trump won the presidential election. And then if you fast forward 8 years from there to now, are things better or are they worse? I think for most of us, they feel much worse. Um, and over that 16 years, Nolan and I have just kind of plugged along. I mean, we continue to work together. We continue to have arguments. We continue to disagree about any number of things, but it hasn't affected our actual relationship. I mean, it hasn't ever driven us to say, well, I can't actually be friends with this person, or I can't do things with this person, or I don't want to be around this person. And so we really started to think a few years ago about what was happening with us, and how that was different from what seemed to be happening to the country. This incredibly bitter division that has defined us now for many years just didn't exist in our world. And so the Civility Project really is the fruit of that inquiry, right? What are the things that we have learned to do? What are the things that we've kind of adopted as ground rules and boundaries inside the relationship we have that prevent us from some of the rancor and division that we see, in other places. I also take a moment to point out what the Civility Project is not. This is not a kumbaya exercise designed to get everybody just to get along and not have disagreements. If you've ever seen Nolan and I talk about politics or the things that divide us, that is not what goes on here. I mean, we get after each other, we get upset, we get passionate.
Thank you.
We really disagree, and it's genuine, and we're not afraid of that disagreement. But at the same time, there is a civility to what we do, and it's not just about how we talk to each other. It's about the things that we do and don't say, the things we know about each other, and the value that we place on the interactions that we have. And so the project really is about trying to get people to see those values, to see how much it can really enrich your life and your thinking if you've got somebody in your life who just doesn't see things the way you do. I mean, really comes at everything from a different perspective. So we've been doing this now for 4 years. Like Lynn said, we have a book coming out next year. We were civil enough to write a book together, not kill each other.
I think that's harder than decorating a Christmas tree together, Steve.
That's right. And so we're really focused on this issue because things are so bad. I mean, you think about what's going to go on in the next 10 weeks in advance of this election. I mean, turn on the TV and watch the ads, or go to social media and watch the ads, wait for the debate next week and the reaction to it. I mean, things are really quite awful. And we do need to have the opportunity, I think, to rethink those things and be able to have the disagreements we have, which are totally legitimate, without the illegitimate, uncivil behavior that we see all around us.
Nolan, do
Yeah,
you want to jump in a
yeah,
little bit and we'll talk about the pillars?
yeah, no, I want to just again join Steve in thanking everybody for joining us. It's a good crowd, it looks like. And just want to add to what Steve said. I mean, I think, when he talked about this is not a project aimed at bringing agreement. We don't want everybody to agree on everything. He and I will never agree on much of anything. We think that uh, our society depends on vigorous dissent and disagreement and debate. And, that's what we're trying to lay the groundwork for here. Like I said, like he said, it's not about disagreeing even to disagree, because that suggests an avoidance. And we don't want people to avoid these conversations, sometimes these difficult conversations about what's going on in our country. Um, I would describe it more as learning to find value in disagreement. that's what we've been able to do.
Did we lose you, Nolan?
Have you lost my sound?
Oh,
No,
now
there
you're
you go.
here.
You're
You just
back.
froze for a minute. Go ahead.
It says my internet connection is unstable, and I think that's probably a commentary on me in general. But anyway, I'll tell you just a little anecdote about the sort of the epiphany moment of the civility project. Stephen and I were many years ago. I think it was either 2011 or 2013. I can't remember which one, but it's a long time ago. We were on Mackinac Island together. Both of us were covering the Republican policy conference that they have every 2 years up there, and Steve was there for the Free Press. I was there for the news. You can imagine it was not the most comfortable place for him to be. Uh, and so, we finished our work one night and headed down to one of the local bars, which was, as you might imagine, just packed full of Republicans. And we were sitting there having a drink, as we tend to do. And I got up and walked away to use the restroom. And as I'm walking across the bar, these two ladies who I knew they ran a conservative website, but they were all in a fluster, and they jumped me as I walked across the bar floor. And that doesn't happen to me a whole lot in bars anymore. But anyway, um, they asked me. They said, "Is that Steve Henderson you're sitting with?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Is he a friend of yours?" And they were just incredulous. And I said, "Well, yeah, he's a friend of mine." They said, "Oh, we don't know how you can stand him." They said, "He's just so awful. We just hate him." And those words, "we just hate him," spoken about somebody I was by then rather close to, it just jarred me. And I asked, "You hate him?" "Yeah, yeah, we hate him." I said, "Have you ever talked to him?" "No." "Do you know him?" "No." And I said, "Well, my seat's open over there. I'm sure Steve wouldn't mind spending a few minutes with you." And to their credit, they walked over there and took my seat. And to Steve's credit, he didn't run away. And they engaged. I sort of stood, you know, off to the side watching this, and they truly engaged in a very civil conversation. I mean, they were asking him questions, he was asking them questions, and this went on and on and on. And meanwhile, I'm just watching the ice in my drink melt. And I finally said, "Well, I'm going to rescue Steve." And I walked over there, and as I'm leading Steve away, I asked these ladies, "Well, how did it go?" And they said, "Oh, God, he's so wonderful. We just love him." And I thought to myself, in 90 minutes, it was probably rough about an hour and a half. In 90 minutes, nothing about the way they believe changed, nothing about their grievances changed, nothing about Steve or his opinion changed. What had happened in those 90 minutes is they took the opportunity to get to know each other, to ask each other questions, to fill sort of the gaps in their knowledge of what they felt, what they thought they knew about Steve, with actual knowledge and information. And they walked away with a much different perception of him as a person, not necessarily about his ideas, but him as a person. And after that experience, we thought, gosh, if we could just get people to do this, because as Steve mentioned, that was a very divisive time, and it's only gotten worse over the years. But we felt that if we could bring people together and just ask them to talk about who they were with each other, to talk about what they believed and why, that we could start, this effort toward a more civil community here, and to get people to talk to each other in productive ways, and to come to the realization that once you get to know somebody and who they are and why they think the way they do, it's a lot harder to demonize them, to hate them. And so we've been at this ever since. We formalized it about 4.5 years ago, thanks to our sponsors, Delta Dental of Michigan and Huntington Bank, and the Ralph Wilson Foundation allows us to do this. And we've been at it for 4.5 years. And what we found is a tremendous appetite uh, for civility and a great concern in our community about the tone and tenor of our discourse today. I don't think people want to be this divided, and they are worried about the bitterness that and divisiveness that we've been seeing. And so, we appreciate you all being here. We're going to talk about how, the things that we do to keep us from killing each other, and hopefully, you'll find some value in it.
Thanks so much, Nolan. So I put in the chat the handout of our 4 pillars of civility, and I'd love for if you guys would start there, talk about the 4 pillars, so that people can have practical steps toward doing this in their own relationships. And just a reminder, everybody, in case you came later, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and I will weave them into the conversation. So yeah, if you guys want to jump in and talk about those pillars, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, as I said, when we started thinking about what it was that we were doing that worked for us, that didn't seem to be working in so much of the rest of the country, really, we started to talk about the norms, I guess, or the institutions almost of the relationship between the two of us, and we have kind of boiled that down to 4 kind of basic beliefs or rules or boundaries that we have learned to observe. The first is dropping assumptions. When we meet someone and learn that they are different from us in some way, that maybe they have a different politics or different race or ethnicity or religion or something, we jump almost instinctively to a lot of conclusions about who that person is and what they believe. We believe that we've got to resist that instinct. We've got to resist that appeal and give people a chance and get to know them before we make conclusions about who they are and what they believe. The second pillar is setting reasonable expectations. When you talk with somebody that you disagree with, what is the goal of your conversation? What is a reasonable goal for that conversation? And what's an unreasonable expectation that you might put on it? We talk a lot about that. The third pillar is listening. When we are talking with someone, having an argument, having a discussion where we see things differently, the idea of actually listening to what the other person is saying is really critical. And we use that word a little differently in our project than I think most of us use in our everyday lives. We'll explain what that means to us to actually listen. And then the fourth pillar is about making an investment in the relationship between you and this other person. There's so many parts of our culture right now that tell us or ask us to walk away from this kind of division, to say, I don't need to do this, I don't want to do this, there's no point to it. In 16 years, neither Nolan nor I has ever gotten up from an argument and said, that's it, I'm done with this guy, I won't be back. We've said some other things to each other, we get after each other, we get angry sometimes, but we've never walked away. And there is something to that, there is some value to that I think enhances the overall value of the interaction in the relationship. So Nolan, do you want to start talking about dropping assumptions?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think the basic pillar here, the foundation of this project. And we have a sort of principle we abide by at the Civility Project, and that is uh, the recognition that all good people come to their viewpoints in the same way. They take the information, the data available, they run it through the filter of their own experiences and personal values, and they come up with an opinion. If that opinion is different than mine, if it's different than yours, doesn't make those people stupid, less intelligent, evil, doesn't mean they're out to do harm. It just means they've lived a different life. And so we uh, think the first step in trying to build a civil, productive relationship with someone you disagree with is to find out what those experiences are, what those values are. And we ask people before they try to engage in a difficult conversation to sit down first and ask questions. And we've done this ourselves, uh, later than perhaps we should have, but just asking those questions, what makes you the political person you are? Why are you a conservative? Why are you a liberal? Why are you in the middle? What is it about your life? What is it about your background and your experiences that have caused you to feel the way you do? And to do this truly with the goal of learning about the other person rather than judging the other person. And what we've found, and we've put a lot of groups through this exercise, in groups of one or two or four or five, just to ask them to talk about what has shaped them about a person. And uh, almost always there's a positive outcome to that. That suspicion, uh, those prejudgments that we make sort of melt away.
Yep, I think Nolan's frozen again.
Oh, Nolan, I think do you want to kick it over, Stephen, or
Yeah, so I'll talk a little
Why
about.
they work for
Oh,
them.
there he's back.
we're having trouble
Am I
with your
having,
internet?
I am sorry.
That's okay.
Um, well, I know I'll do the best I can here. But anyway, this idea that we find out who people are and why they believe they are before we start that engagement is 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 crucial. I mean, and you come to realize that people have valid reasons for holding the positions they do. Steve and I were friends and and debating and going back and forth for years before we finally sat down and had that conversation. And it was extraordinarily beneficial to do so. I had made all sorts of assumptions about why Steve felt the things he did. And we tend to do that. We hear the word conservative or liberal, uh, progressive, Democrat, Republican. We hear those words, those labels, and our mind starts processing descriptors. Well, that must mean you are this or you are that or you're the other thing. And once you stop and have the conversation to find the actual reasons people feel the way they do, it might not change your views at all, and it shouldn't. But hopefully, it builds a greater respect for the other person and for their, for the way they've lived their lives. And I think that respect is a first step toward civility.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so I'll talk just a little about the experience that Nolan and I had with this, which was through an NPR program called StoryCorps, which is it's an effort by the network really to collect stories about American relationships. They travel around the country and invite people to come down with somebody who's close to them and have a conversation for an hour in front of a microphone about the basis for that relationship, the value that each person gets from that relationship, and maybe some of the challenges that exist in the relationship. Um, and generally people take a spouse or a family member with them, to do this. But I remember when they announced they were coming to Detroit, I immediately said, I'm going to take Nolan with me to this thing. So on the way down, I told him, I said, look, we're not going to go in there and do what we would normally do, which is get in there and have an argument about something. I want us to go in there and tell each other our stories. I'm going to tell you what makes me a liberal or a progressive or whatever label you want to put on my politics, the experiences that I've had, the things I've learned that lead me to believe that that's the best way to solve problems. And then you're going to do the same. You're going to tell me what makes you, Nolan, a conservative. And we'd known each other for 10 years. This is in 2017. We'd known each other for 10 years at this point. We had worked together quite a bit, and we were really close friends. But when we went into this, they invite you to go into this little Winnebago and sit across the table from each other with a microphone between you. We went in this little Winnebago and told these stories. Both of us, I think, were shocked by some of the things that we heard. Even after 10 years of working together and knowing each other, we heard things that we had not known about the other person, things that they had experienced, things that they thought about, things that they wanted and valued. It was really, really quite revelatory. But then there were two other things that happened that were really important. One, both of us heard things that were really familiar to us as well, things about the other that we knew to be true about ourselves, right? We found commonalities, similarities between the two of us that we didn't know existed. Not to say that we agreed on things, but that I think the value system that both of us used to try to make decisions about politics and things like that, there was a lot more overlap there than we thought there might be. And I think in terms of goals, the kinds of things we want for the country that we live in and the people who live in that country were much more similar than we thought they would be. And then the other thing that happened during the conversation, I think, is that we just got a better understanding of each other. And I think that has been really evident in the way that we interact with each other now. I think if you were to go back and look at us arguing or having a discussion before 2017 and look at the way we do it now, I think you'd see a big difference. It's not that we get along any better or that we agree anymore, but there's a respect and an understanding that I think is a little deeper than it was before we had that conversation. And the reason is that we know why the other is saying these things. We know where it's coming from. We know the history and the basis for the differences between us. And I think the ability to understand that and have respect for that leads us to different kinds of interactions. And again, this happened in 2017. We've been doing this together for 10 years. I think all the time about what that might have looked like if we had done it up front, if we had started there rather than interacting with each other in conflict at first, if we had just kind of taken some time to understand who the other person was, how different would those first 10 years, have looked than they did. And so that idea of fronting that exercise of starting there was really a big part of what we want to do with the Civility Project. Often with big groups like this, what we'll do is before we even come to talk to you, we give the organizers a chance to pair you up to have a conversation about what you believe and where you're from and where all of it comes from, as a way of sort of opening up our minds to the idea that knowing each other is key to being able to have decent civil exchanges across political lines. Um, and so that idea is at the center of dropping our assumptions, of not reacting to people according to what we think about who they are, but giving them a chance to actually show us who they are before we judge them. The second pillar, as we said, is setting reasonable expectations. And I think this is a really critical part of building a civil exchange. Nolan has a great phrase that he uses when we talk about this. He says, look, a conversation is not a competition. You're not in a conversation, especially a conversation about politics or something else you disagree on, to win, to crush the other side or humiliate the other person or cow them in a way that they ultimately agree with you. A more reasonable set of expectations is um, getting information, getting information about what somebody else thinks, how somebody else thinks, how somebody else arrives at the positions that they hold. Where does that all come from? What are the things about what they're doing that are different or similar to what I'm doing? And if you think about the way in which we have these conversations, have these arguments right now, I mean, we're really far from that kind of ideal. Things like social media, things like the 24-hour news cycle, the absolute urgency that gets attached to every exchange of information or ideas. These things really push us to that idea that it's a competition, that if you're going to engage with somebody, especially somebody that doesn't agree with you, your goal has to be to set them straight, right? To let them know how wrong they are and let them know how right you are. You want to leave that conversation with the idea that you won. But if you think about it, nobody really likes to do that. That doesn't feel good. It more often leaves you depressed or disheartened than inspired. And I think if we can, within ourselves, uh, get to the point where we say that that's just not the goal here. The goal is for me to actually learn from this other person to the extent that it's possible. Learn about who they are, learn about what they think, and use that to help shape the way that we think about things. I think for both Nolan and I, the value of this relationship in many ways is being able to measure the things that we think in the process that we're going through to come to our conclusions against what the other person is doing. That difference helps round out your understanding of the issue itself and the way that you're interacting with it. That's a tremendous value, and it's something you couldn't get really from somebody that you agreed with necessarily. Stating that as the goal and staying away from this competitive sense of win or lose, I think is a huge part of getting to be able to have a civil exchange with somebody and maintain a relationship with someone that you don't agree with.
Yeah, and Steve, and I've turned my video off with hopes of improving my internet connection and also sparing you the smug but there are, as Steve said, we're not out to convert one another. If conversion was our goal, I would have gone crazy years ago. I know I'm never going to change Steve's fundamental views. I'm never going to convert him to my way of thinking. And then if I did, where's the fun in that? Where's the value in part of the goals we set when we engage is to learn from each other, to test our opinions. And, there are certain tips we can offer to help you through that process. I saw a question earlier from Steve Vincent, I believe it was, who asked, well, how do you have a meaningful conversation with somebody who's just spreading information? And, we get that question. It's the first question we always get. We never do a session without getting that question. And, it always brings to mind an experience I had when I was visiting with John Dingell, the late congressman, one time, and he was getting pounded with calls from environmentalists because he had introduced a piece of legislation they disagreed with, and it was call after call after call. And he finally hung up the phone and he put his hands, his face in his hands, and he said, they think they're the only ones who talk to God. And I think we need to be mindful that everybody thinks they're the only ones who hold the truth. They're the only ones whose opinions are righteous. And we just ask people to, check that self-righteousness at the door, check that smugness, and be open to the idea that there may be some validity in the opinion you're hearing from the other person, but or at least be mindful that they believe their view the same way you do, that their opinions are the right opinions. They're just as convinced of their truth as you are of yours. And I think the key here then is to ask each other civil questions. Why do you think that way? Information, rather than simply trying to pound each other into the ground or humiliate each other or what or whatever. Just try to engage in that productive back and forth. And we've always found that if instead of lecturing, you're asking questions, it takes the heat down, it tones down the distrust and the apprehension, and it fosters engagement.
Great. So we have some great questions in the chat. I thought before we run out of time, we should definitely attend to them. So Nolan, you mentioned the one about how do you navigate a conversation with someone who just spews misinformation? And I want to combine it with the next question because I think they're related. So the next question says, how do you navigate conversations with family about the appropriateness of using Facebook as a platform for discourse? And I think this is a great time to talk about social media and its role in this whole civility thing or its role in spewing incivility. And so maybe talk a little bit about how you deal with people in conversation who are trafficking misinformation and the whole social media component of this, guys.
Well, I don't believe it's possible to have a productive conversation on social media. I think it's not set up for that. I mean, it was designed to bring us together. It hasn't done that. I mean, it serves as a tool for division, uh, and it brings out people's worst instincts, I think, and they something about social media uh, causes folks to lose their manners, drop rude and vile discourse I've ever seen. It's uh, you, you want to ruin your day, go on social media before you or ruin your night's sleep, go on social media before you go to bed because you're bound to see something there that makes your blood boil. And I don't know that it's the best platform to have the kind of conversations we're talking about. I think they're always done best face to face because uh, misreading signals and miscommunication is so much at much greater risk over social media than it is when you're engaging face to face.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both agree that social media is playing a terrible role right now and moving people further apart. We disagree pretty fundamentally though about its potential and its use. I'm a prolific user of social media. I love the connection. I love the availability of information. I mean, it makes the work that I have to do a lot easier to be able to get all of those things in one place. The problem is actually not the platforms or the technology. The problem is us. The culture, I think, is being reflected in the way that people have chosen to use it. And so rather than expanding our communities or our sense of connectedness to people, it's reflecting our instinct to pull the margins in and to exclude people. And all of the tools on social media are rendered around the idea of doing that. Think of all the different things you can do on social media. I can mute somebody, I can block them, I can unfriend them, I can expel them from the group that I've created. And of course, it's not good enough just to do those things. You have to tell everybody else that you did them, right? I blocked that guy and I'm never talking to them again. And then everybody cheers. That's a cultural problem. That's not the problem of Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. It's our culture being reflected in those things. And eventually, I think social media will occupy a really different place in our society because those cultural things will change. But I say all the time, as a prolific user of social media, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being on social media and taking advantage, but I think you do have to recognize the things that are going on there that are really damaging to civil discourse. All of these tools, all of the siloing of interest that goes on there. When we're dealing with each other in the real world, when we're interacting with people in our neighborhoods or our school communities, our religious communities, the places where we are close in with other people, we've got to make a distinction between that and what goes on social media, and not be the same, not indulge the same instincts that get rewarded really on social media.
And I think that plays into the third pillar, because social media is not a platform that encourages active listening. And that is the third and perhaps the most important pillars
Yeah.
of this project.
Yeah, we say listening is different for us than we think it is for most of us in our private lives. I think for most of us, we'd say, if we had to define listening, we'd say that if we're not talking and letting the other person talk, well, then I'm listening, right? But if you interrogate that a little bit and wonder about what we're doing when we're not talking, I think in a lot of cases, we're not actually listening. Sometimes when someone else is talking, we're sitting and thinking about, well, as soon as that person's done with what they're saying, here's what I'm going to say back, right? We're planning our next statement, or we're judging what they're saying while they're saying it, and that's not really listening. I think the listening we're talking about is about showing an investment and an interest in what the other person is actually trying to say and why they're saying it. Where does this come from? Why do you believe this? Where did you hear that? Those are the kinds of reactions I think we have when we're really listening. And so I actually have two tests for myself to determine when I'm actually listening to somebody. One is when they're done, could I repeat back what they said? Maybe not word for word, but in good faith, could I kind of capture the essence of what they were trying to say and make the argument as though I were them? Could I actually kind of step into their shoes for a second and really, reflect that I understand what they're trying to say, what they're trying and why they're saying it? And then the other test I have is whether I have questions for that person when they're done talking. I find that when I'm really listening to somebody, I'm actually curious about something they said. Maybe they said something that I hadn't heard before. Maybe they said something that I didn't quite catch all of or quite understand all of what they were trying to say. You know, following up what someone else says with an inquiry about what they've said, I think, first of all, leads to an actual exchange of ideas and information, which is, I think, a bedrock principle of civil discourse. But it also is a signaling exercise, right? The interrogative form of our language is nowhere near as threatening or dismissive as the declarative form. If I answer what you say with a statement of certainty, that's the opposite of what you said. That's not really a way to tell you that I want to talk to you. That's more of us talking at each other. If I ask you a question about what you said, if I ask you a question that would tell me more about what you think, that's saying to you that I am interested. And so I think, again, those are the tests that I kind of apply to myself about whether I'm really engaged in a discussion, in an actual exchange with somebody, rather than just talking past them or at them.
Yeah, and I think we can go from there to the final pillar, the fourth pillar here, and that's sticking with this. I mean, this is not just a one-time little exercise. This is an approach to relationships that uh, you need to practice every day and with everybody in your life. I mean, Steve and I have never given up, as angry as we've been at each other, and we do get angry, and we've never given up. But the other thing we've never done is we've never made it personal. We've never said you're a blank. And that's also intentional because we recognize the damage words do. And I'm a firm believer that people will get over the things you do faster than they will the things you say. And so we're always mindful of not making this personal. And we're also, I mean, this idea of persistence also depends on uh, very much on keeping things in perspective. And, it is important to be engaged, politically informed. It's good to be passionate about the policies and politicians you support. Those are good things. But other things are important too. And it brings, to mind a experience we had last year when we talked to a nonprofit group in Lansing. And there was a young woman sitting who sat through the whole session. She sat up front, and at the end, she waited for everyone to clear. And she came up to us and she was crying. And she said, I've got a situation in my life I want to talk to you about. Maybe you can help. And she had recently married, and her husband were wanting to start a family. And the husband and his father were at each other's throats over their political disagreements. One was a Republican, the other was a Democrat. Uh, and they could not be in the same room with each other without getting into almost violent arguments about politics. And they came to the point where they wouldn't be in the same room. They wouldn't see each other. They couldn't talk to each other. And she was under the she was convinced they hated each other. And she said, I don't want to bring my a child into that sort of family, into that sort of environment. And it just, that really stuck with us in the terms of keeping things in perspective, uh, recognizing what's important and really what's less important. And what's important is to have people in your lives you can count on, people in your lives who love you and you love and will be there in the dark moments. A lot more important than having everybody in your life agree with you. and share your politics and your viewpoints. So, you know, we feel that that perspective is essential to allowing for civil engagement.
So you guys, we just have a few minutes left. Do you want to finish with any wrap-up comments or thoughts about the upcoming election? I'm sure that's on everybody's minds too.
Well, I mean, this is going to be horrible. It already is horrible. And if you read the, I mean, if you watch any sort of television, you know how bitter and awful it's getting. If you look at your social media feeds, you see the intense intensity of this election and the intense incivility of this election. And I just urge people to knock that off. To understand that we're one country, a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different sorts of people, but one country. And we're at risk of blowing it apart if we can't learn to tone things down and engage a little more intelligently and a lot more civilly rather than with what we've seen with this horrible name calling and trashing of one another at every level now of our politics. We got to knock that off. Uh, it's not good
We
for us,
also make a
our
point of
children.
talking about acting, what we call acting where you have agency. I think one of the things that's true about all the things that are going wrong right now is that uh, uh, many or most of us even just feel completely helpless to make a difference, right? You sit and watch the news at night, or you watch what goes on in social media, and what's the opportunity for you to make it any better? For most of us, I mean, there just doesn't seem to be one. And so we always emphasize that what we're talking about here is is doing things differently in the spaces where you can have a say. Think about your family, think about your neighborhood, think about your school or religious community, think about work. The people you interact with every day are the folks that you have an opportunity to kind of change the balance of those relationships, to change the way that those interactions go, and to some extent not worry as much about the larger trend. um, I think quite cynically that some of what's being done is being done intentionally to make us anxious about each other, to make us anxious about people who think differently from us, and the possibility that they might get control and they might get authority and do horrible things to us. There's no question there are some real threats to democracy out there. There are some real threats to equality out there. We got to be mindful of them. But again, think about the people in your life. Think about the people you see all the time. Do you think that about them? Do you feel that about them? Or is it just that maybe you disagree? You see things a little differently. I think if we act in those spaces, um, uh, we have a better chance of success, but we also, I think, have a better chance to feel better about the way things are going, seeing that the people who think differently from you are not all the monsters that the 24-hour news cycle and social media has made them out to be. They're just people who see things different, and there's a way to maintain relationships with people like that without all of the uncivil behavior that we see.
And don't reward incivility. I mean, don't give your votes to incivility. Don't give your business and your eyeballs to social media platforms and broadcast platforms, cable outlets, media outlets in general that profit from keeping us fearful and devices of each other. Reject incivility, wherever you encounter it.
This has been great, you guys. Thank you for staying on for the whole hour. We're just blown away that we still have 96 people here. It's really
Yeah.
special. And Bethany, thank you so much for organizing this. Do you have any last comments that you want to share, Bethany?
No, I just really appreciate you all coming here today and participating. I have taken away, I've actually saved some of the notes that you mentioned. So everything has been great, and I really appreciate your friendship and camaraderie between the two of you. I think that is something that is probably lacking a lot in society. So I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Awesome. I put in the chat a bunch of times our website, greatlakescivilityproject.com. Please sign up for our newsletter. We send it out once a month. We will not spam you, but we'd love to have you on our list and you'll know about upcoming programs. So thanks so much. Go Blue, and glad to be here. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.